Hello, and welcome to Women with Books. I'm your host, author Lindsay Emory. Happy New Year! This is honestly my favorite time of year. I love January 1st. It's like Lindsay Emory's holy day. I love planners. I love goals. I love a clean house after Christmas. I love fresh sheets of paper and new pens and sitting down and being all vision-y and futuristic. I just love it. I love it. So if you're listening to this podcast on January 1st or 2nd, you know what I'm going to be doing. I am just basking in my new planner, in new ideas and social media schemes, and I just love it so much. I think it's appropriate then that my guest today is Roni Loren. And you're probably asking why? What does Roni have to do with you sitting in a room with a bunch of planners? Well, Roni would probably laugh at you because she's a planner nerd like me, and she loves the self-help nonfiction genre. And we talk a little bit about that in this interview, along with her new book that's out January 1st. It's called The One You Fight For. It's the third book in her daring and critically acclaimed contemporary romance series, and we also talk about that in this interview. Now, I was sort of tossing around the idea of doing a Women with Books reading challenge this year. I had a list and graphics all ready to go. I had some discussions with some friends and colleagues, and then I realized Roni Loren has already done one. So I'm just putting the link to Roni's reading challenge here in the show notes so that you too can have a fun and simple framework to set all your reading goals for 2019. And also in the spirit of Roni, because basically she's already done everything that I figure out. She's like 3 steps ahead of me, which I'm trying not to get competitive, but I mean, seriously. But I read this book and I actually was like, I love this book so much. This is a true story, y'all. And I went on a Facebook group. I'm like, you guys, I have to recommend this book. And Roni's like, oh yeah, I've already read that. So anyway, I thought I'd share my number 1 book recommendation for anyone who is trying out some New Year's resolutions this January. The book is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, I read the book, the paper version, but I know a lot of people really like the Audible version or So, if that's your jam, know that has a lot of recommendations. I have not personally listened to that, but like I said, lots of people like it. I won't say this book changed my life yet, but if you are looking for a way to start new habits or in some bad ones, this book lays out clear, concise, and motivating ways to do that in a way that I have not seen in a lot of other books about habits. I feel like this book will really help you understand how new habits get started, how you have to replace bad habits with new habits. I just think it's a great book for a lot of people to start off the new year with. So I will put that book and the links to all the books we recommend in this podcast in the Women with Books newsletter. I always say it's one of the best parts of this podcast is actually the newsletter part. I'm going to try and put some extra content in there for January with some nonfiction book recommendations and special recommendations from some other guests that we've had on. So sign up for that newsletter at womenwithbooks.com or the link in the show notes. Ugh. That's one thing that will not change in 2019 is the fact that I can't always speak coherently, which is a shame when you have a podcast. And now on to the interview with Roni Loren. Welcome to Women with Books. Today I'm very excited to talk to Roni Loren. Welcome, Roni.
Hi there, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love that we are both in the same city.
Right.
And we're like still on the internet talking to each other, which is probably the best way to talk to anyone across Dallas. But
yeah, we don't have to go out in the heat this way, so we can stay in our air-conditioned homes.
Or deal with like an hour's worth of traffic. Yeah, we should just do a weekly Meet Dallas author meetup this way.
Right.
How are you doing these days? You're in the middle of a trilogy. Is that what we're calling it?
It's actually going to be 4 books. So I'm in the middle of books 2 and 3. So book 2 just came out in June, and book 3 will come out in January. This series follows a group of 4 women and some other people, but 12 years later, after they've been through a school shooting. So they come back together for a documentary and haven't seen each other in years, and kind of reconnect friendship-wise and also fall in love because it is a romance. So it's a little bit of a different kind of backstory for a romance, but it is a hopeful, uplifting book, even though it has a dark backstory.
Now, I have to ask, how did you get the idea for, yes, I want to write the HEAs of a school shooting survivor?
Yeah, that's kind of the reaction everybody gave when I was pitching it to publishers, like, oh, well, that's, different. But I read very widely, and I read a lot of nonfiction, and a lot of my ideas kind of mesh together from that. But I had read Columbine by Dave Cullen, which is a really great book. It covers a lot of things, and it's really done with a good touch, and it's interesting, the stuff that we didn't hear in the news back then, because Columbine happened, and we just saw the news clips of, sound bites and stuff. But I read that, and that kind of gave me the initial idea that I wanted to give people who have been through that. Unfortunately, now a lot of people have been through that, which is awful. But I wanted to show that they're not just a news story that happens for 30 seconds on the news, that they have to go on with their lives. They have to deal with the trauma of it, and everything in their life is affected. So I wanted to show that process of the healing, and that they still deserve their happily ever afters, probably more than any of us. So I wanted to put it in that context, and because a lot of books about school shootings are not, they're thrillers, or they're much more about the crime aspect of it, and these books are not. So the crime has happened a long time ago. This is not suspense. This is much more about, where do we go from here? How do we define ourselves as not just the person in the news story? Like, how do we move on and accept being happy when we've lost so many people too? Like, is it okay to be happy? So it's a lot of emotional content to deal with, which is what me as a writer, that's what I like to dig into. I need a lot of emotional depth in order to me to write the book and to be, interested in writing the characters. So
I think I was one of the ones that when I first heard about this, going like, oh, whoa, Roni, what you doing? What are you doing? Like, that's crazy. But okay, so I was at the movie theater this weekend, and they were showing trailer for this movie, and I don't even know what it's about, but it was like a post World War II movie, and like the guy who came back and his PTSD and stuff, and I finally realized, I put it together, I'm like, we do stories about that, people coming home from war and dealing with their PTSD and their happy endings. And I've read books about people who survived 9/11 and how they rebuilt their lives, and so why not do these kinds of traumatic events and also give these people their HEAs? And because it's just, I don't know, it's just like a war. I mean, that sounds basic, but it is. I mean, you went through something traumatic. You have a group of people that understand you, and how you come to terms with the rest of your life about that. So yeah, once I kind of shifted into that, I was like, oh, well, duh. Because I think what you said was exactly right, is that we see it as like a 30-second blip. And like, oh, we've gotten over it. Why can't someone else get over it? And it's not like that at all.
Yeah. And I think too, I graduated in 97. So it was kind of like the generation right before school shootings became a thing that we've actually had to worry about. Not that there weren't ones before, but I think now it's like always in the consciousness of kids, especially, in high school, going to school, that's just a risk that they have to take. They do all these drills, you know, the lockdown drills and things. So a lot of my readers are younger, like, you know, in their 20s. And I think it's because they've grown up kind of having this as a background threat, you know, which is awful. And I have my own son, so I worry about that. But so I think people have connected with it in that way too, of like, this is a reality that we have to deal with, and, you know, kind of a way to explore it in fiction, which is how a lot of us explore, you know, difficult things is through reading books. So
have you gotten any blowback, negative, or have people, you know, reached out to you in any way about this?
I was really worried. My tagline on my website is for fearless romantics. And so I tend to write things that I consider a little edgy or whatever. And this is the first time I've gone into a zone that I was like, people really could say I'm trying to capitalize on tragedy and all of that. But you could say that about every thriller that kills off a woman, you know, which is like every thriller. So there's a lot of tragedy in books. Like that's what books, you know, are about a lot of times. But so I worried about it, but I've actually been surprised by the overwhelming, like, positive response I've gotten. So once people have read the book, including, you know, like the official reviewers at Kirkus and all that, like, I've gotten really good reviews on it of like, I've handled it in a way that people have appreciated. So thank God, you know, because you never know if you're really going to pull it off. You know what you want to do and what your intention is, but whether it happens, you know, if you actually pull it off or not, you don't know until the book's out there. But I've gotten really good feedback of like, this was cathartic, or this, you know, was not what I expected it to be in a good way. Like, you know, people kind of went in thinking it was going to be a lot scarier or depressing than the book turns out to be, because the book is about healing and hope. I mean, that is the theme of the book, all of them, all in the series. So I've actually been really happy about the response, and I've had no one has come to me and said like, I can't believe you wrote a book about this, or you didn't handle it in a, you know, gentle way. And so it's been a really good response, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Well, the next one is that we mentioned, the third one in the series, is coming out in January 2019, and it's called The One You Fight For. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us about that one, because it'll be your next one.
Right. So this one is about Taryn, who's one of the women in the book, and she's a forensic psychologist. So basically she lost her sister, and her younger sister, in the shooting. So her mission in life is basically to find out why people do the things they do, like why school shooters do what they do. So she's dedicated her whole life to that research, and that's really been her driving force in her life. And then she stumbles upon the hero, who happens to be the older brother of one of the shooters. Yeah. Ooh. So there's a huge conflict there, and the brother, who's the hero, has all of this. He's been sort of in hiding because, you know, media and all of that. And he has this internal guilt that he was not there for his brother. He was training for the Olympics, so he was a high-level athlete and really pretty much got all the attention in the family. And so he has this, like, ongoing, you know, guilt that he should have been there and not let his brother go down this path, or maybe if he had been there, he wouldn't have turned in that direction. So there's a lot for them to work through. Obviously, if she falls in love with this hero, introducing him to her family, who have lost a dog, you know, so this one was probably the most emotional one to have to, like, the content to write, but I feel like it, you know, it really was, they are the right people for each other, and they have a lot of healing to do together through that. So but yeah, that's what it's about. So The One You Fight For is she's fighting for her sister, is the play on the title, and then they're fighting for each other. So
wow. I always say, I mean, one of my things is, one of my biggest, not pet peeves, critiques, I guess, of contemporary romance is the conflict. You know, it's so hard to make a good conflict in contemporary romance, but I'd say you got it. I mean, that's a pretty good one.
Thanks. Yeah, what's funny is when I read books that have like light conflict, contemporary romances, and they pull it off, I'm always in like amazement because I'm like, how do you do that? Like, I can't do that. Like, I have to have like really tough conflict to write through it. But like some of them, and it can be done really well. There are some authors who do it great, and I love the books, and I'm like, how did they manage to write the whole book about this very minor thing? But it was good.
No, you just have to do it well. I mean, it can be about like, I don't know, you used my stapler at the office or something.
We can't get this festival together or something,
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I was a therapist before I was a writer, so I think where I get all of my words and ideas from is that like really deep emotional conflict, and if it's not there, then I'm stuck. I can't write. So
well, your publisher has been hitting these covers out of the park because they're all just so swoony and gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah, they do an amazing job. They have a great team there.
Yeah, just really beautiful. And the one that's coming, the one you fight for in January, is that a biracial couple on the cover?
She's biracial, so
okay.
Yeah, her mom's African American, her dad is white.
Okay, well, because that's just so rare too for there to be a good
yes
cover featuring a biracial person or a person of color. So they did a beautiful job with that. It's just really outstanding.
Thank you. Yeah, they've been really good about it. And the first book is actually the heroine's Hispanic, and they put a Hispanic model on the cover of that one too. So I've been really happy with. I mean, they send me covers, usually 5 or 6 to choose from, and they're always like, all of them are great. So they've done a really great job, and it's nice to have people on my covers again, because when I did erotic romance, there was no people on the covers. So it's nice to be like, oh, characters, yay, I get to see people.
Yeah, especially hot, good-looking ones. Yay.
Right.
Well, I am a big fan of your blog and your newsletter, and I think I've complimented you in person with it. But one of the things that you were really open about last summer and this summer was your screen-free summer. Is that what you called it, or do you have another name
screen-free or device-free? I kind of used them both.
Yeah. And it started off with you doing it mainly for your son, and then I think you started to incorporate some of the I don't know, rules. I mean, tell us about like how that evolved for you, because I'm fascinated as a Kindle reader how to make that work.
Yeah, well, I did it for my son mainly, like you said. He's on the autism spectrum, very high functioning, but I started to notice when he played lots of video games or when he was on his iPad too much, he was just, more annoyed with me if I talked to him, or he would snap at me, or just like not be himself, because he's usually a pretty happy-go-lucky kid. And so I'm like, okay, and for me, if I have an issue, I read a book about it. Like that's my go-to thing. I told my husband I need a shirt that says I read an article, because every conversation I start is, I read this article. But I went and read all the books I could find on, the effects of screen time and kids and the brain and all of this stuff. And so it convinced me that, okay, we're going to try for the summer to go device free, mainly because I did allow TV, but he's not a big TV watcher unless he's watching with us. So that really wasn't his issue. So he gave up all video games, no iPad. And that included like traveling on planes and places that usually we would really like lean on the iPad to keep him busy. But after probably about a week of him being kind of grumpy about it, he took to it like fully, because we had planned in things knowing that he wouldn't have devices. So we planned board game nights, and we planned movie nights with popcorn and all these little, kind of cheap but minor activities. And so he got into the fun of that. And we also signed him up for guitar lessons. So that was the other trade-off we did. And he did so well, and it was so like convincing, like obvious in his attitude and stuff, that I'm like, well, maybe I need to look at my own device habits, because I'm on them all the time. So yeah, I started to limit, like I got the Moment app on my computer so that in the afternoons the internet would shut off. I put an app on my phone that it tells me how long I've been on the internet. It'll like pop up with a notification that you've been on too long, or been on your device at all too long. And just mainly for focus and me being able to write, I wanted to kind of get back to not being distracted. And it's helped me a lot, just looking at like how many books I read each year. Like usually I read about 40 to 50, and like I'm already almost at 50 for this year. And it's because instead of going to my device, I'm picking up a book instead, or, you know, traveling with a book in my purse instead of taking out my phone. I don't count the Kindle, as you were saying, as a Kindle reader. I don't count the Kindle as a screen for me, you know, because I have the paper, the e-ink kind. So as long as it's not a backlit screen, you know, I'm okay with that. And with my son, I would have let him if he wanted to read a book on a Kindle. I'm not going to tell him he can't read a book. That will never happen.
Right.
But yeah. And then this summer when it started, I didn't plan on doing device-free summer and with him. And he came to me and he's like, are we going to do that again? And I'm like, if you want. And he said he wanted to do it again. So he voluntarily did it this summer. So yeah.
That is amazing. And I think it gives probably a lot of moms who are listening hope and admiration. And
yeah, I will say that when it feels like it's impossible, because he was on the iPad all the time. So it wasn't like he was a light user and he had been using it for years. So it was really drastic for me to cut him off from it. But kids are resilient, and and now he's been playing guitar for a year and is like this great little guitarist. So, and he's fallen in love with music. So it can be done. It's not easy for that first like week to 10 days, but after that, if you can get through it, it can be done.
It is really, yeah, we took the screens away from one of my kids as a punishment for something she did this summer. And I told my husband, I was like, this is more of a punishment for me because I'm at home and I have to hear about it. And, but she did, I think it did. Eventually she was like, oh, I'm going to go read. That is actually fun too. And just still, I think I probably could have planned, if we had done it on purpose, it wasn't a punishment, I think it would have been a little bit more effective. But if I had told my son it was a punishment, he would have been all rebel. It would have been we explained it to him of like, we think this will be good for your brain. So he can relate on that level. So he's like, okay, we'll try this. So he's good like that. And I think I asked you RWA, and I forget now what it was, but do you still read on Kindle, or have you mainly gone back to paper because of all this research?
I'm about 60-40. So 60 with print, 60% print, and then 40% ebook. And it's mainly the books I can't get in paper, you know, because a lot of books are just an ebook. I get on ebook, or if like the price is vastly different, if it's $25 for a hardback versus, you know, $12 for a Kindle. But in general, I'm preferring paper lately just because I can get away from my screen completely. It's a little bit more calming before bed and stuff. So, but yeah, I don't have anything against either one because I do read in both. But yeah, I've definitely gravitated more towards print because I do keep track because I'm a nerd. So I keep track of like how many I read in print and in ebook, and it has shifted over the last probably 3 years more to print.
Well, I think the clue that you've moved over was your new purse purchase that you posted about, that you had to buy a new purse for very specific reasons because of all this.
Yes, I needed a purse big enough for a hardback because I subscribe to like Book of the Month Club, and it's always a hardback, and a lot of the nonfiction I read is in hardback, and so I had this tiny little purse that would fit my Kindle, but it wouldn't fit like a bigger book, so I had to go to Target and like measure to make sure I could fit a hardback in my purse before I bought a new purse. But yes, I officially have one now, so it's awesome.
Which made me laugh, and I don't think I said this on Facebook, but it made me laugh because I would have expected you have a big purse for your planners. Because I know you're a planner person too, but apparently that didn't make you don't carry those around? Or
Yeah, I don't travel with my planner at all. So I have the Day Designer, and it's big and bulky, and it's great, but I don't have to travel a lot for, you know, day to day for work. I work from home. I have a home office, so it just stays and pretty and nice and neat in my office with, you know, without having to shove it in a bag. And then if I travel like to RWA and things like that, I just usually print out planner pages and tuck it in like a folder or something. So I don't travel with the big planner. That would be a lot. I'd probably have a stooped shoulder. It's so big and heavy. So.
But isn't that funny? I was just, because when you said, I have to get a new purse, I'm like, what? You didn't have one for the planner? Because that is me. I'm like, I will take a Kindle and my planner. So those are my priorities.
Which planner are you using?
A Hobonichi Cousin.
Ah, yes.
So it's not huge, but...
Yeah. But it's got wonderful paper.
Oh my gosh. I know. I was looking at some of the other ones you've been posting lately. So for those who don't know, we're both planner people, and we are in a planner group on Facebook. So excuse us while we talk about planners. No, but so this time of year, because school's starting and we're looking at 2019 already, everyone's posting like all the companies are posting like their new planners and stuff. So I look at them, I'm like, oh, I really like that. I really like that layout. But the paper of the Hobonichi is so great. You can fit, it doesn't smear. I'm a lefty too, and so that's nice for me that it's not going to, it can smear, but very rarely. It's got daily, weekly, monthlies, so it just has everything in a beautiful little Japanese package, and I just love it.
Yeah. Only writers would get together and talk about paper and how awesome it is.
I know. When I find someone in real life, they're like, oh, actually, I just had a friend of mine. She's like, my daughter's wanting a new planner for school. I'm like, okay, here, what does she want?
Right, let's talk.
Do you need a coupon for that? I know where to get a code.
Right.
Well, you've kind of mentioned it a few times, and it's something that doesn't come up as often on this podcast. But nonfiction reading, and I know that you are a huge nonfiction reader, and you keep track of all this. So, what percentage nonfiction versus fiction do you read?
Usually,
do you have that statistic on the top of your head?
not to the point, but probably about 40% to 50% is nonfiction. So I read a lot of nonfiction. Usually, it's about productivity or the brain or screen time or creativity. Sometimes it's about completely random topics like food. I love food books. I don't know. I have a thing about food books, but yeah, I don't know if it's just the information part that I love, but it also sometimes will, trigger story ideas, like I said. So I really just want to learn all the things about all the things. So that's why I'm really attracted to nonfiction. And usually I have one nonfiction going at the same time as a fiction. So I don't typically read two fiction books at the same time, but I can do a nonfiction and fiction and kind of bounce back and forth depending on what mood I'm in, at the time. Like in the mornings, if I want to read, I usually want to read nonfiction. In the evenings, I usually want fiction. So yeah, I don't know why. Maybe it's my brain's too tired in the evening to process too much, information, but yeah. Well,
and that's one reason why I love your blog and newsletter, which I'm kind of putting those two together because I think there's a big overlap.
Yes.
So for listeners out there, if you want to know more about the nonfiction books Roni reads, just subscribe to our newsletter, because I think you put in most, if not all of them, the ones you definitely recommend, you put in there.
Yeah, fiction and nonfiction. If I love the book, I'll post it on the blog, that all the blogs go out into the newsletter, so they are definitely linked.
Yeah, it's nice to. I get excited when I get one of your newsletters. I'm like, oh, what's she gonna tell me to read now? And sometimes it's like I can go, well, that's not really for me, but I'm just a book nerd, obviously. Hi, podcast. And I just like hearing about what other people have to say about their favorite books. So thank you for providing that to all
you're
of
welcome.
us.
Thanks.
And so speaking of which, you had a blog post recently that I kind of wanted to get more into, where you talked about reader personality and book recommendations. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so as you know, Lindsay, but nobody else would know, is I was in a class about personality and writing. So it kind of taught me about different aspects of my personality and why I write a certain way and why my books are a certain way. But that also translated into why do I read the books that I read and why do I like the books that I like. And it was kind of this epiphany to me of like, oh, so because we've all had the experience, right, where everybody is raving about a book. And so you go and you get the book and you read it and you're like, I don't like this at all. Like, what are other people seeing? Like, this is terrible. And so to me, I never understood like why is it such a disparate thing? Like, if a book is well written, shouldn't it be enjoyable for most people? But no. So it's based on what we personally are attracted to in a book. And so I realize when I give a book recommendation, that's going to come into play. So if I am on my blog and recommending a fiction book, if I say I love it, it usually is going to mean that it had really deep characterization and that it had likable characters, because for my personality, I'm not as much about the intricacy of the plot. If I don't like the characters and I don't know a lot about the characters, like get all of their information and backstory and why they are the way they are, then I'm not real invested in the book. Now I have another friend who she's the complete opposite. So she loves a twisty turny plot. She reads a lot of suspense. So the character's depth is not really that important to her, is if the suspense is written well. So I know now when I recommend a book to her, like, this might not be for you, or I didn't like this because it didn't have deep characterization, but I think you would love it because the mystery was amazing. So it's going to make me think differently when I, suggest a book on the blog of like, I like this because of these reasons. So if you're a reader who really likes this thing too, then this will probably be a good book for you. If you're not, then it might not be the best for you. So that's kind of what the blog post was about, of if you come to me for a suggestion, it's going to usually have really good characterization, and it's going to be less, heavy focused on the plot. So, and
is that going to change how you recommend books from now on? I mean, are you going to be pointing that out to people, or they should just know that?
No, I think I'm going to be able to point it out. I mean, in the blog post, I kind of talked about the things that make a book great for me. Like, for instance, page turning. Like, I don't like a slow book. Some people really like very, slowly paced books if it's great literary fiction and all of that, and they can stick with it. I need to be moving pages quick. But like I recommended on the blog, the last one I recommended was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager, which is a suspense. And I recommended it. It was like, this is actually a book that I normally wouldn't fit my mold of what I like, because it was much more about twisty plot than it was about the depth of the characterization. But the twists were so good that it still won me over. So it's not like I can't like something else. So I was able to go into the details of like, you're going to like this if you like twist, if you like a little horror and a suspense, if you so I think it is going to affect how I recommend books and say, like, if you'll like it if you like this, versus just, this is a great book, you should read it, because not everybody's going to think it's a great book.
Well, I love the blog because, as you kind of alluded to, we were in the same class, and I'd already kind of started thinking my thoughts about that, and then I saw your blog. I was like, oh, Roni got it. And I was going to post it online, and I'm like, no, I'll just save it for our conversation. So because awesome. I think it's a good way for all readers to kind of just spend some time thinking about identifying what they like out of a book, and it will help you, I think, find more books like that, or when you're talking to other readers, because if someone says, I just love the way they described the interiors of the mansion, I'd be like, right. Yawn. Okay. Right. It sounds interesting, but I know that I usually, if I have something with a bunch of description, honestly, I float over it. I'm just like, give me what the next time they kiss, or the secret panel in the wall or something like that. Like, I don't really care what the brocade looks like, but it is interesting also, as from an author perspective, to kind of identify what it is that we're going to be doing for readers in this book, and what we're not going to so maybe I won't be describing the heirloom tomato plants or something. Right. But what I will be doing is giving you a kiss in a secret panel, Right. So, right. That's a really interesting exercise to go through.
Yeah. And it definitely applies to writing, because I remember early on, when I first sold my very first book, I sent it in, it was a contemporary erotic romance, to my agent. And she said, well, erotic suspense is really hot right now. At the time, it was having a moment. So she's like, you have some suspense elements in here. Why don't you heighten that and make it more of an erotic suspense? So, I'm a new writer. This is my first chance. This is the first time with an agent. So I'm like, sure, I'll do that. Well, I discovered really quickly that, I'm all about the characters and not so much the hiding secrets and the suspense. So I rewrote it and it was really difficult to do that way. And I sent it to my agent, and she's like, no. She's like, you're a contemporary erotic romance author. And I'm like, that's what I thought, but okay. So we laugh about it now, but every time I come up with an idea that has like a suspense element, I have to like pull myself back and go, no, Roni, no, no, you can't. You like suspense, but you can't write it. So yeah, I've learned about myself that where my strengths lie is not burying, mystery, secrets, and all of that. Like it's not what I do well. So I definitely think it applies personality wise both ways. So reading and writing, but most of the time, if people who are coming to my blog who have read my books and liked my books, I think they're going to like the books I recommend, because the things I like in other people's books are the things I try to put in my books. So I think it definitely translates.
Well, I'm definitely going to put a link to that blog post in the show notes, so other readers the readers who are listening to this episode right now can go look at it, and because I think that's probably sparking a lot of ideas in people's heads. And like I said, when I read your blog, I think I probably journaled on that day and like came up with, and it was interesting how fast it came up. Like if I really I just spent like a few minutes and I could come up with 5-6 things right away. I was like, oh, these are my things that I want to read and that I want to write. So I'll probably be doing my own blog post soon about that and see if people agree with me. I don't know if that's a scary thing too.
No, I think it's interesting though. Like, and I'd love to hear other people's like takes on what their kind of check boxes are that they're looking for, because it's just really interesting to me, and it determines a lot of what genre you go digging in or subgenre of romance, because like we learned in our class, different subgenres are going to play to different things. Some are going to be more about characters, some are going to be more about lots of sex scenes, like an erotic romance. Like if you can't write great sex in erotic romance, you're not going to get a lot of readers. So it really can be genre specific, and it's all very fascinating to me. Super interesting.
Have you ever gotten a comment or a note from an editor or your agent that surprised you? Like they said, oh, you're really good at this, and you're like, well, I am? Oh.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think the good news is I usually don't get a lot of notes, because I'm I'm a obsessive writer. So by the time they get it, I've gone through like 1,000 versions of the book. But I think what I like best is when they laugh at something, like it's, a joke or some funny situation, and like I didn't realize it was that funny, but so it's always like fun to see a little smiley face like that they enjoyed that. So yeah, I look forward to, amongst all the typos and things that they're fixing, that I get a couple of smiley faces here and there.
I will say I think that the humor parts do give me a little anxiety, because sometimes when they laugh at something, you're like, well, I didn't mean to make that funny. Right. But I think I just have kind of a naturally funny voice, so people will like hear snark when I didn't necessarily mean it, but I just am snarky naturally. But I think the other times were like, I had a couple, I won't mention the book, but I had a book where the copy editor did not get my jokes.
That's the worst.
And was like trying to correct them. I'm like, no, that mistake is a joke.
Yeah, I have been there. Yeah, if a copy editor doesn't get your humor or your voice, it can be a really trying copy edit. So I actually had that experience a couple of times where I'm like, canceling everything they, have tried to change, because I'm like, no, I was being sarcastic there. I meant to do that. So yeah,
I mean, but it does make you second guess it too. You're like, wait, maybe that's not such a good joke, right? if someone's not getting it,
right? Or you use a slang word and they're like, they fix it, and it's like you have to go ask your friends, like, this is a word that people use for this, right? Like, or an expression that they use, right? Yeah. Oh,
I had a friend who's another author, and she used the term. I think I can say this, and no one will identify. She used the term le sai, like le, like it's like French, le sai,
right?
And then she got that note from the copy editor, and they were trying to like change lay or something, or they thought it was like someone, they thought it was like Lee side, and so but there was no character named Lee, and so she like came to us and she was like, what is happening, why is this not obvious? And we're like, yeah, that's like it's a slang thing, like le sai. But that copy editor was clearly like 85 years old or something.
Right.
I don't know.
Was not down with the slang. Yeah.
But I do appreciate copy editors, what they do, because I'm not a detail-oriented person. So I please come into my books and tell me all the details that I missed.
Yes, they do save us much more than they annoy us, so that's true.
Yes, very much so. I mean, the fact that I'm only thinking of like 3 incidents, and other times I'm like, yes, please, thank you so much for that. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you started off as a therapist. What turned you on to writing, or what made you into a writer?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I wrote, my very first novel was written in high school, and it was New Kids on the Block fan fiction. So, yeah. So early on, I think I was 15 when I wrote that. And I legitimately wrote it and like was planning to query it because you're 15 and full of confidence. But I ended up chickening out at the last minute. But I had bought like the book because it was before, we had all the internet access. I had a book of the agents, that you had to flip through and like mail things in the mail. But so I didn't send it, but that was my first kind of attempt at writing. And then I started college as a double major in English and psychology because I was interested in both things. And then, as you do when you get to college, you're like, I should be practical, and why am I doing a double major and killing myself? So I dropped the English major and went to psychology and ended up getting my master's in social work. And I did that for a number of years. And then I had my son, and I was planning to go back to work, and had my son. It was like, I really, really don't want to go back to work now. I don't want to put him in daycare. And that was not our plan, but we figured out how to make it work. But 3 months home with a newborn, and I was like, oh my God, I have to do something. Like, I'm climbing the walls and I'm not sleeping and all of that. So writing became kind of like an escape to get back to. And he was born in 2007. I got a book deal in 2010. So it took 3 books in about 2.5 years. But that's how I got back into it. But it was always part of who I was. I just wanted to actually have a job that made money when I got out of college. Although I went to social work, so it's not like you make a ton, but something to support myself and not starve. So it was one of the things. Writing was something I had to come back to later when I could afford to take a little time off and do it.
Yeah, I think you find a whole industry of people that started off with doing something else because just our society doesn't tell you that writing books is something that's makes money, and sometimes it doesn't. So
yeah, and I think too, I don't regret going through getting my master's and being a therapist, because I don't know if I would write the way I write if I hadn't gone through those years of working with people and dealing with mental illness, helping people through that. And I worked with kids in an incident or in one of my jobs, and then I did adoption work. So I got to see a lot of different parts of, humanity and human emotion and all of that. And it taught me a lot about people and empathy and all of those things. So I don't regret any of that. I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore because it's a very difficult job. Not that writing isn't, but social work is difficult in much harder way. Emotionally is, if you're a sensitive person, it's a hard job with high empathy. It's a hard job to be in. But that's what
you need to be a good social worker. You need the high empathy. And then, like, I know several ex-social workers, and they were just really destroyed sometimes by what they had to deal with.
Yeah, I worked with, for the adoption, I worked with birth mothers, so it was people placing their babies for adoption, and I mean, what can be more emotional than that? So I would come home from that, and it's just like, I don't know how you recover after a day of that. So day after day of that is really tough. But yeah, I think it definitely has informed my writing and makes me think about lots of different people and lots of different situations. So I'm glad I did it.
Well, let's talk about, I know you put all your recommendations on the blog, but maybe you have some other new things. So what have you been reading or recommending lately?
Right now I'm reading the other Riley Sager book, The Final Girls. So these books are suspense but they're based on like horror movie themes. So like The Last Time I Lied has like the sleepaway camp backstory, girls killed at a sleepaway camp, and now it's a decade later and they're trying to figure out what happened. And then The Final Girls is about 3 different women who survived like serial killer murders and come back together and are figuring out a new suspense. But so kind of dark and different than what I normally read, but they've been good. And then I just read an audience of one. I don't know how to pronounce the author's name. Srinivas Rao, I think is the name, but it's about creativity and how to kind of reclaim your creativity just for you, like to get back into the enjoyment of just creating something and not thinking about all the pressures of like deadlines and where is this going to sell and who's going to read this, and
oh
like,
my gosh, one click
right. So it was good. It was some of the stuff in it, because I read all the books about all the things I had read from different books, but I did like the concept of, sometimes you just have to, whatever your creativity is. So for me, writing, just have to write something like, and not think about where you're going to sell it and how you're going to put it out there. Like, just write it because you want to write it and it's fun to write. And so, this 8-9 years into a writing career, I think that's a thing that I need to do sometimes, is just write for the fun of it, even though I do like writing, but it is a job, as you know, so you do get in the rut of writing to your deadlines, and you kind of lose a little bit of the whimsy that you have early on. But yeah,
or you're writing something and then you're like, well, last time I did this and editor said this, and so maybe I'll change it to what I know that they're gonna like. And yeah
so, but yeah, that's what I've been reading. And I'm also reading Constant Craving by Tamara Lush. It's a serial, so I decided to try that in serial format, because that's happening now. So different serial services are popping up, so I wanted to see what that was like. So I'm reading a couple things right now.
As you do. Which one is in your purse?
In my purse is Final Girls.
Okay. And do you get those from, you mentioned the Book of the Month Club? Is that the one you're a subscription? Okay. And I've seen you post those photos too. So you've been a member of that for a while, right?
Yeah. The Book of the Month Club is one that's been around like when our parents were, getting Book of the Month like decades ago. That it's the same company, but they like completely revamped the whole system, I think 3 years ago. And I've been a member pretty much since they launched the revamped version. But yeah, you get a pick of one hardback a month from usually 5 that they choose. You can skip months and not get charged, so that's really nice. And usually like the hardback, you're paying I think $14.99 a month, and the hardbacks are usually like $25 hardbacks, new releases. So it's a good deal, and it forces me to kind of try other genres outside of my normal romance stuff, because I'm in the romance world. I know a lot of YA writers, so I find my book recommendations through there pretty easily, but I like to stretch, and read from different genres, because I feel like that can help inform my own writing, kind of, put variety in the mix. And so Book of the Month is really good about picking things that I would never probably have looked at just on my own, and trying new authors and new genres that I usually don't read in, and it's been really good. So yeah. I've enjoyed it.
Because I think you do post pictures of what you've gotten. Again, I don't know if it's on your blog or newsletter, but I go, wow, I haven't heard of that, or that would not be something I would pick up.
Right.
But I'm sure it's good. I mean, just you get into ruts, and that's what I like about the library, honestly. I guess maybe the library is like my Book of the Month, because I go in and I check out new releases. I'm like, I have not heard of any of these, because we get in our little book caves and talk to the same people over and over again, and then we go, oh, there's so many books out there.
Right. Which is a blessing and a curse. But
yes, I know.
Yeah.
Well, would you like to go ahead and do our lightning round? I finish up all my interviews with some fun questions. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Dark or milk chocolate?
Dark.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
When your phone rings, do you answer it?
No.
How do you normally waste time on the internet?
Reading articles.
I read an article. On your next vacation, would it be to the mountains or the beach?
Mountains for sure.
Do you call it soda or pop?
Soda. I don't even really call it soda. I call it a soft drink. So.
Oh, that is a new one. Very formal.
I don't know. I'm from New Orleans, so maybe that's what we call it there. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Y'all are like a whole nother little colony into yourselves.
Right.
Okay. On a romance hero, do you prefer abs, forearms, or a chiseled jaw?
Abs.
Are you more likely to buy a book cover with abs on it or a beach scene?
Probably a beach scene.
Okay. And the very important last question, what are your feelings about turning to the last page of a book first?
Never. Never.
When I was reading this question, I was like, I bet she's a never girl. I mean, people surprise me all the time with this, but I just had a feeling about you.
Yeah, I don't want any spoilers for sure. And I mean, if you read romance, I know even when I'm scared, it's going to end okay. So I don't have to flip to the end. Like I don't know how they're going to get there, but I know eventually. That's what I love about romance, that it's going to be okay. So.
And on that note, we will end with an happily ever after.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Lindsay. It was fun.